Well, good morning, everybody. Glad to see you this morning. Glad that you're here with us in our study. We're in 1 Samuel chapter 23, 24, 25, and 26 today. That's right. We're going to get on our horse and we're going to be riding it really quickly today. We missed last week, and so we're trying to cover a lot of material here today. So I encourage you to get your Bible, pull out your devices, get to your comfy spot, get your coffee, get your juice, get to your couch, your big fluffy chair, the kitchen table, wherever you study best, and let's jump into our text today. We're sitting here talking about David and Saul, and so let's do a quick review. It's been a couple of weeks since we've been together. David is now completely on the run. Saul has killed all the priests, all the people in the city of Nob. And God's word is becoming faithful and true. Here is David on the run. He's supposed to be the king, and he's got questions in the back of his mind, and God just consistently encourages him, uplifts him, keeps reminding him of his purpose. And we're going to see that a lot in the text, so I hope you take a look at that. A couple of weeks ago, I introduced this idea that we got two guys. We got one guy that's headed towards God, one guy that's headed away from God, and we need to be keeping track of that. So be making this mental list in your mind of those characteristics. And is there something that I can apply to my own life? So we see here now that David has taken his family way over to the east, over to Moab. There we are. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get my slides right here. Way over there to the east in Moab. Now, this is not Israelite territory. David has done this sort of in a military tactic. He knows that my family will be safe over there because Saul won't come and chase me over there. So he leaves his family way over there in Moab, but he comes back to concentrate and focus on Saul and these Israelite cities. So David hears there in the opening chapter of chapter 23, David hears that the Philistines have crossed over the border into the city of Keilah. Now there's kind of a neat, interesting fact here, I think, that both David and Saul have these incredible spy and communication networks. They both know and hear where each other are and what's going on. Now, David seems to be able to do it quite more effectively than Saul does, but they both do just a fantastic job of this. You take a look at the map, you see there that Keilah is right there in the middle of the map, and it's located in the low-lying hills there between Judah and Philistia, and it makes it real easy for people to come in there and raid those cities. So the text says here that David inquires of the Lord. What should I do? Should I attack or should I not attack? This phrase, inquires of the Lord, is really a technical term that expresses inquiring of an oracle or a spokesperson when you're simply looking for a yes or no answer. Now, what we learned about last week was Abiathar is now traveling with David. He is the last guy in the family of Ahimelech that was destroyed by Saul. And Abiathar is this connection piece to God. And so this is, I kind of think, a really cool kind of point here that we really need to catch. David here is needing this support. He's needing this encouragement. You can imagine the pressure on his shoulders. He already talked about a couple of weeks ago the remorse that he felt about all those that had been killed, all those Israelites that had been killed because of him there in the city of Nob. And so he is compassionate. He feels for his people, his coming people of his kingdom. And so he wants to be able to make the right kinds of decisions. And so the fact that Abiathar is there traveling with him, he has quicker, easier access to God's direction. So I want us to kind of put this together. God is providing for David exactly what he needs to be successful, to honor him. And I think that's a cool point. I think he does the same for us, and we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a moment. So David says, hey, God, what do I need to do here? And so he starts inquiring of the Lord. Do we ever inquire of the Lord? In what situations do we inquire of the Lord? You know, I think this is a good question for us to think about, for us to meditate on. I wonder, though, here, there's this neat underlying truth or teaching going on in this text. David doesn't know how things are going to play out. He just needs to know, God, you're with me, and you're gonna get me through to the next point, and that's him being king. I wonder if sometimes maybe we should be praying more prayers about, Lord, what's best for me right now? How do you see this? Not what I want, not what I desire, but Lord, what is your best for me? I pray that I lean into your best, that I accept what it is that you've given to me and I apply it to my life. I wonder if that might make things more effective in our life. Give us that encouragement, just like David's being encouraged during this time. So, God tells David to attack. And then he adds that the Philistines are going to be given into his hands. And this is exactly what happens. We see that there in verse 5. So Saul hears, remember Saul's up there in Gibeah in his main house. He hears that David is down in Keilah defending the Israelite people against the Philistines. But instead of rejoicing, going, yeah, my man, way to take care of my people, he doesn't care about that at all. He's upset that David is down there doing this, right? He should be rejoicing in this fact, but he's not. Right? So he gathers some army together and he goes down there and he goes after David. Well, David hears about his plan, and again he inquires of the Lord. Sure enough, the Lord says, yes, Saul's coming after you, and the men of Keilah are going to give you over to Saul. Now this should be that little ping, ping, ping in your brain. You should be remembering what happened in the last chapter there in the city of Nob because of Ahimelech's association with David. Because he helped him, Ahimelech was wiped out. All the priests were wiped out. All the people of Nob were wiped out. So maybe this is kind of twofold. Maybe it is that the people of Keilah are thinking about that. Hey, if we help David, Saul's going to come down here and wipe us out. So we're going to give him away. And even David here recognizes this as well. He says, listen, I don't want these guys to die too. So David hightails it out of there. And the text says that Saul searches for him every day, but God does not let him find him. So here's a couple of key contrasts right off the bat that we see between these two guys, right? Saul destroys the city of Nob, but David saves the city of Keilah. David consistently asks God before making any important moves, but Saul depends on rumors and espionage. And also there's this real cool connection with Abiathar and David. It's very similar to Christ and us. Here, after a while, check out Hebrews chapter 4, verses 14 through 16. Let me summarize it in this way. Since we have a great high priest, we come to the throne room of grace and find grace for help at just the right time. Christ does that for us. I think that's a real cool point. Right? All right. We see here in verse 16 that Jonathan comes and encourages David. Now, this is almost a comical moment. I wish I could really see this played out. Here Saul is. He's using all these tactics, espionage, tricks, whatever he can do to find David and to trap him and to capture him. And here comes Jonathan. Zip, zip. no problem. He finds David. They get together and they talk. It's almost pretty comical how this happens here. But Jonathan encourages David. The text says he encourages him in 3 ways. That Saul, number one, he says, hey, Saul's not going to get to you. God's not going to let that happen. Right? Number 2, he says that David, you're going to be king. And thirdly, he says, Saul knows all of this. He knows all of this is going to happen. And then we see right after that they renew their friendship, their covenant with each other that they made back in chapters 18 and 20. So the Ziphites tell Saul where David is hiding. Again, maybe they're concerned of what happened there in the city of Nob. They're ready to give David over to them. It's kind of funny here. Saul says to the Ziphites, hey, I want you to double check, because David's a pretty tricky trickster here. He's very conniving. He may get out of there quicker than you think. I want you to go and double check. Double check that he's still there. And sure enough, he's still there. Saul gets his army and he comes around. And sure enough, they trap David. And David kind of thinks this is it. I'm done for. And he thinks, man, this whole thing is over. But remember just what Jonathan said. Hey, God's not going to let you get caught here, right? Saul's never going to capture you. So news comes to Saul and his army that not too far away, some Philistines have crossed the border and are attacking some Israelite cities. And so he leaves David instead of trapping him. And David is saved. And he goes back to his stronghold there in En-Gedi. And you can see En-Gedi there on the map on the western shore there of the Dead Sea. So we come to chapter 24. When Saul returns from pursuing these Philistines, he's told that David is hiding there in the wilderness of En-Gedi. He's got about 3,000 men, and he's on his way to the wilderness, and he stops there at the rocks of the wild goats. You'll notice there on your map that En-Gedi is located on the western shore of the Dead Sea. It's approximately 35 miles south and east of Jerusalem. You notice Jerusalem's not on the map. This is not the Jerusalem of the New Testament that we know about. The Jerusalem, I believe, is still there, but it's so small that it's just not very well known. All right? There were some caves in this area. All right? Now, you see this picture on the screen. This is one of the caves that they believe David actually stayed in. We talked about last week the Caves of Agilem, right? They believe that this is the actual cave of that. Now, this is from the inside, actually looking out, but there are some pictures of the inside. As I talked about a couple of weeks ago, these things really open up to really huge caverns, and there's little tunnels, and there's more caverns behind that. But here's the idea. They're going and they're hiding in these caves. The text says that Saul and his men are there. Saul needs to relieve himself or go to the bathroom, so he goes into one of these caves, and he lays his coat down, and he walks a few feet away to take care of his business. And David and his men happen to be in that very cave, right? Hiding. Well, David's men think this is the moment. They think this is divine intervention. They say, hey, God has given Saul into your hands. Here's your opportunity, David, to take down Saul. All right? There's an interesting, if you've been paying attention or doing some side reading on this, on your own, this word hand is mentioned a lot. 11 times in this chapter, 9 times in the previous chapter. The word hand is usually referencing some level of power. But in this case, I want us to concentrate on the idea of the restraint of power being used here. Okay? The restraint of power, right? So David sneaks down to Saul's robe, cuts off a piece, right? This is hugely symbolic. It's really symbolizing the end of Saul's reign, the beginning of David's reign. But almost immediately, David feels bad for what he has done. He feels like that he has done something wrong. Maybe it is that he got caught up in the moment. And with further consideration, now that I've thought about it, this might not have been the wisest thing to do. Have you ever done that? Have you ever said something, you ever done something, and maybe later that day, later that week, you thought, "Oh, dude, this wasn't good. I wish I could take that back." I think this is one of those moments here. You see, that David does not want to seize the kingdom this way. Here's probably the biggest teaching point for the rest of this chapter, and definitely for the rest of 1 Samuel, and that's waiting on God's timing. You see, David wants to receive the kingdom in the timing in which God has set it up. Isn't this huge? I think this is a big point. It's a big point for us. Something I think that we all struggle with. God's timing, right? I believe David is trying to do the right thing. Notice I didn't say the easy thing, the most direct thing, the most obvious thing. I think he's trying to do the right thing, and he's really struggling with it, but he's pursuing through it. And I think this is, again, if we notice the contrast between the two, one guy's headed towards God, one guy's headed away. What can we take away from David at this point when it comes to trying to do the right thing? So he persuades his men not to do anything to Saul. And so Saul ends up leaving the cave, and David gets up, walks out of the cave, and then ends up calling out to Saul. This is kind of crazy here. And he ends up calling out to Saul. And so Saul stops, and they start having this conversation there starting in verse 8. And the text says that David bows down to Saul, and he calls him my Lord and my King. And David shows respect for Saul both in terminology and body language. And then he begins to go on this almost like a defense case. Saul, what are you doing teaching or coming after me? Why are you pursuing me? And he says, my hand is not against you. And he holds up that piece of robe as if to say, see, I could have killed you. I could have taken you and captured you. But I didn't. The rumors that you've been hearing are not true. And he pleads for divine intervention, asking that God vindicate him before Saul. His hand is not against him. Let God judge between them. He's doing the right thing here. Again, not the easy thing, not the simple thing, not the quick thing, but the right thing here. So I've got a couple of questions for us. They're fill in the blank. They should be simple. You should be able to knock it out in a couple of seconds. So here's my first question for you. All right? Doing the right thing is what? What would you say? Is it easy? Is it simple? Is it difficult? Is it challenging? Let me ask you a similar question with just a little bit different take on it. Doing the right thing takes what? What does it take to do the right thing? Guts? Belief? Trust? Encouragement? Knowledge? What would you put in there? I think those are some good questions that we need to ask ourselves. So Saul here has a moment, and that's key, a moment of humility. He says back to David, look, I have not been righteous. I've acted wickedly towards you. David, you're right. You're going to be king. So first we see Samuel, then we see Jonathan, and now we see Saul saying, you're going to be king. This is kind of the point that I've been talking about now for a while, this encouragement that David needs to hear that he's on the right track, to not give up, to keep waiting on God's timing. Even Saul is saying, what I said way back when you were a boy, when I anointed you there in front of your brothers, it's going to come true. You're going to be king. Hang on. Hang on. Be faithful. Continue to do the right things. So Saul says, yes, you're going to become king. Please do not cut off my descendants. Don't ruin my name. And David promises that he will. And he honors that. History kind of shows us that. It shows us that Saul's sons and his family are really killed off by the Philistines and the Gibeonites. In fact, he continues to honor the family by taking in Mephibosheth, which is one of Jonathan's sons. The text says then there that Saul goes back to his headquarters in Gibeah, but you notice, David's a pretty smart dude. He goes back to the stronghold of En-Gedi and he stays there because he knows, I'm not trusting Saul. I'm not trusting Saul here. So we come over to chapter 25. In the beginning of chapter 25, we see that Samuel dies and is buried in Ramah. The loss of Samuel must have been a terrific blow for David, having what appears to be one more reason for despair, right? David turns to journey further into the desert. One of a key person of support is now gone, and so he runs further away from Saul. Maybe Saul's thinking, yes, Samuel's gone. Maybe I can even get closer to David now, right? The text goes into a story about a man named Nabal. So David sends his men to a very rich guy named Nabal and asks him for food and water supplies, whatever it is that they need. Nabal refuses. David gets upset, gathers 400 men, says, get your swords and let's go after Nabal. Now the text here doesn't explain a lot of backstory or other things going on. So let's connect some dots here and add some history to this. So we know that David is doing two things. Number one, he's on the run. Woo, man, he's getting away from Saul as much as he can. But he's also doing something else. Number two, he's also protecting the Israelites. All right, we've seen that already a couple of times. Next week we're going to see that a whole lot more as well. So he's out there protecting the Israelites. Now, common courtesy or common understanding is if somebody is protecting you, that you will pay them back. Everybody understands this. There is this maybe unspoken agreement between those two. And so David is simply counting on this agreement. He is out there protecting the people as well. So the text opens up in this story about Nabal, about, hey, this was sheep herding time. They're out there shearing the sheep. And so the assumption is that David's out there protecting those guys from any raiders that might be coming, any Philistines that might be coming along. So naturally, he says, I'm sending some of my guys to Nabal. Nabal, can you please, in payment for our protection of your guys, provide for us some food and some water and supplies, right? The text says that these guys were so nice to Nabal, right? They honor him. They bless him. They are so nice to him. They are not mean. They are not ugly. They are not trying to extort anything from him. But Nabal absolutely refuses to help. He's a very rich man. Why shouldn't he be able to do it? So David's men come back and tell him what Nabal did. And David goes nutso. He goes crazy. He way with 4 A's overreacts to what Nabal does. And so he gets his sword. He gathers 400 men. And he says, you guys get your swords. We're hightailing it back to Nabal. And we're going to kill him. And we're probably going to wipe out his family as well. That's what David is thinking. That's the plan of what's going on here. We're going to go down there and we're going to take them out. So some of Nabal's servants, hear or see what's going on, see that David is coming, see that he's upset and mad, know what Nabal said to David. And so these servants tell Abigail, Nabal's wife, what happened, about how good David's men treated Nabal and how bad Nabal treated David's men. And so Abigail shows up. She gathers food, she gathers wine, and she goes out to meet David without her husband's knowledge. And upon meeting, David basically just comes out and says, hey, we're taking Nabal out. And we're probably going to take his whole family out, right? The text says that Abigail is beautiful, and in my words, smart and intelligent and wise. Abigail says to David, hey, this is my fault. It's not Nabal's fault. She pays honor to David and asks him to forgive her. Abigail softens David first with many presents, addresses him as a superior, and in a speech full of polite innuendo, she flatters him and prevents David from bringing bloodshed on himself. She recognizes that David one day will be king and seems more conscious that that such bloodshed would be unworthy of the anointed one of God. Now, this isn't in the text, but I thought it was maybe a good connection point here. Samuel is dead. He's not there to provide David with good motives by calming him, by giving him direction and purpose, some wise words. And I feel like Abigail is actually being a substitute for Samuel at this time because of what she says. I kind of feel like that's what Samuel would have been saying to David if he would have been there alive to say those things. Right? David recognizes that Abigail has saved him from wrongdoing, and that God himself is at work in these events to prevent the guilt of bloodshed. And he's learned a lesson, that consistent personal restraint makes the way for God to work, whereas violence only gives way to violence. There's another little interesting point here as well, why this is key, a key military tactic for David as well. One of the reasons people are against Saul or not wanting to obey Saul is that he's just gone nutso and he's been killing his own people. And that's what David would have ended up doing. Nabal's an Israelite. And he would have ended up killing that, and that wouldn't have been good for David's kingship if he would have done that. And so there's another good reason why this is happening. Abigail ends up telling her husband what happens, and the text says that something happened to him. He went into shock. Some people think he might have had some sort of stroke or a heart attack or something, but the text doesn't really say what that might be. But the text just simply says that about 10 days later, Nabal dies. And Abigail ends up becoming David's wife. In chapter 26 then, while Saul is in Gibeah, we see a very similar story that happened not too long ago. The Ziphites tell where David is hiding. Saul gathers about 3,000 men, and they go after him and find him in the wilderness of Ziph. All right, there in chapter 26. Abishai, David's number one dude, says, hey, let's go down there to where they are and let's see what we can do to Saul. You see, God intervenes here. So while Saul and his men are camping out, God causes them to go into a deep sleep. And Abishai and David sneak down in and amongst 3,000 guys. This is a pretty incredible scene, right? And Abishai wants to kill Saul. Again, here's this opportunity to do it. But David refuses. He wants it to let this play out as God has intended. You see, He's remembering the lesson of Nabal. He's remembering the lessons before of waiting on God's timing. He's remembering these things. And so instead of killing him, he grabs Saul's spear, which is a symbol of kingly royalty and power, and he grabs Saul's water jug, and they take off. David runs a little distance away, and he begins to call out to Abner. This is Saul's number one general. And he says, hey, look at what I've got. Have you not been protecting your king? And he shows him his spear and his water jug. David asks Saul, hey, why are you chasing me? What have I done wrong? And Saul again has a moment where he says, look, I've been wrong here chasing you. I'm not going to chase you anymore. And so David goes his way and Saul goes his other way. And that's the last time that David and Saul ever see each other. Guys, I think there's a couple of key points here that I want us to take away. Number one, we need to trust patiently in God to accomplish His purposes. I think we can easily break this up into two halves. Trusting patiently. That's a challenge, isn't it? Trusting patiently, waiting patiently. My wife said this some years ago in a Bible class. Man, we're praying for one thing, but sometimes God's got to move 17 different things to make that one thing happen. And those 17 different things may take some time, so we need to wait patiently. And the second half of that is God's good purposes. He's got something good for you, intended something great for you, right? So wait patiently. Number two, teachability and flexibility are important in spiritual growth. We see David doing this. He's learning on the fly. Yes, he's the great king, about to be the great King David, but he's learning and he's growing. He learns some things quickly. He applies some things quickly. And guys, we need to be able to do that as well for our spiritual growth. Well, guys, that's our study for today. We're going to try to handle the rest of 1 Samuel next week, so be sure and read those next 4 chapters. Y'all have a good week. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.